Hi, my name is Frank Dawson. I'm 55 years old, and I've been driving trucks across America for nearly 3 decades. The story I'm about to tell you sounds like pure fiction, something you'd dismiss as an old trucker's tall tale. But I swear on everything I hold dear that every word is true. If you've got a good heart, pay close attention, because what happened on Route 66 last spring will touch your soul in ways you can't imagine. It started on a Tuesday morning in April. The sun was just breaking over the horizon as I loaded up my rig for a standard haul from Amarillo to Los Angeles. Nothing special about that day. Same coffee in my thermos, same baseball cap on my head, same playlist of classic country ready to go. After kissing my wife goodbye and patting our old retriever Duke on the head, I headed out, just like I'd done thousands of times before. About 20 miles west of Amarillo, where Route 66 stretches out like a ribbon across the plains, I spotted something unusual on the shoulder. At first I thought it might be debris from another vehicle. Happens all the time out here. I got closer. I realized it was moving. Slightly, but definitely moving. I slowed my rig, pulling carefully onto the shoulder about 50 yards ahead. In my side mirror, I could see it was an animal of some kind. Large. When I climbed down from the cab and walked back, my heart sank. It was a horse, a beautiful chestnut quarter horse. Lying on its side, breathing heavily, its coat slick with sweat despite the cool morning. "Hey there, big fella," I said softly, approaching with caution. I've been around horses enough to know they can be dangerous when frightened or hurt. The horse's eyes rolled toward, intelligent, pain-filled eyes that seemed to be pleading for help. There was no obvious injury that I could see, no blood, no broken legs, but something was clearly very wrong. The animal trembled with each labored breath. I looked up and down the highway. No ranches in immediate sight, no other vehicles. It's just me, my truck, and this suffering animal on the loneliest stretch of America's most famous road. I called the local sheriff's office, but was told animal control couldn't get there for at least 2 hours. Looking at the horse's condition, I wasn't sure it had 2 hours. "Hang on, buddy," I told the horse, reaching out slowly to stroke its neck. To my surprise, it didn't flinch or try to pull away. Instead, it seemed to calm slightly at my touch. What happened next was pure instinct, not a vet or a rancher. But I couldn't just leave this animal to suffer. Grandfather had raised horses in Oklahoma, and I'd spent summers there as a kid. I knew enough to recognize that this horse needed help fast. I returned to my truck and lowered the ramp I sometimes use for loading pallets. Then I grabbed the emergency blanket I keep in my cab and returned to the horse. "This is gonna be tricky, partner," I told the animal, as if it could understand me. Maybe it could, because when I started to position the blanket beneath its body, it made a weak attempt to help, shifting slightly to allow me better access. Getting an 800-pound horse into the back of a semi without proper equipment sounds impossible. And honestly, it should have been. But desperation makes you stronger, I guess. With a combination of the ramp, the blanket as a makeshift sling, and more strength than I knew I had, I somehow managed to slide and half-carry that poor animal up and into my trailer. I emptied out half my load, leaving packages and boxes on the roadside to be picked up later to make room for my unexpected passenger. Once I had the horse settled as comfortably as possible, I called my dispatcher. "You're not gonna believe this, but I've got a sick horse in my trailer." There was a long pause before Jerry replied. "Frank, I've known you 20 years, and you've never been a drinking man, so I'm going to assume you've had some kind of stroke. I'm serious." Jerry found it on the side of Route 66, looking half dead. "I'm taking it to a vet in Amarillo." Another pause. "You know, this is coming out of your pocket, right? Company insurance doesn't cover equine rescue operations." "I know," I said. "Just tell the client there's been a delay." Act of God or something? Act of insanity. More like Jerry muttered. But he agreed to make the calls. I turned my rig around and headed back to Amarillo, driving as smoothly as possible to avoid jostling my injured passenger. Every few minutes, I'd check my rear view to make sure the horse was still breathing. Dr. Sarah Chen at Amarillo Large Animal Clinic didn't bat an eye when I pulled up with a horse in my semi. Vets in ranch country have seen it all, I guess. Colic, she diagnosed after a quick examination. Severe intestinal blockage. He would have died within hours without intervention. "Can you help him?" I asked. Dr. Chen nodded. We'll need to operate. It's going to be expensive, Mr. Dawson. I looked at the horse. Those intelligent eyes now glazed with pain and pulled out my credit card. Do what you need to do. While Dr. Chen and her team prepped for surgery, I called Jerry back to explain. The situation, he wasn't happy, but he arranged for another driver to pick up my load. I'd lose the commission, but at least I wouldn't lose my job. You're a good man, Frank. Dr. Chen told me as her assistants led the sedated horse to surgery. Not many people would go to this trouble for a strange animal. I shrugged, suddenly embarrassed. Couldn't just leave him there? Does he have a name? She asked. I hadn't thought about that. Looking at the horse's reddish-brown coat, gleaming even in its distressed state, I said the first thing that came to mind. Rusty, his name is... Rusty? Dr. Chen smiled. Well, Rusty is lucky you came along when you did. I waited through the 3-hour surgery, was calling my wife Martha to explain why I wouldn't be home that night. She wasn't surprised. Martha knows me better than I know myself sometimes. Of course you rescued a horse, she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. Should I expect you to bring it home as a pet? No, I assured her. Once it's recovered, the vet will find it a good home. Probably belonged to someone who didn't secure their trailer properly or something. How wrong I was. Rusty made it through surgery successfully. Dr. Chen removed the blockage and said with proper care, he'd make a full recovery, she offered. To keep him at the clinic until they could locate an owner or find a placement? I visited Rusty the next morning before heading home. He was standing in a recovery stall, looking remarkably better. When he saw me, his ears perked up, and he nickered softly. Hey, buddy, I said, approaching the stall. Feeling better, huh? Rusty stretched his neck over the stall door, nuzzling my shoulder gently. Dr. Chen, who was checking his vitals, raised her eyebrows. He remembers you, she said. That's unusual after what he's been through. I patted Rusty's neck, strangely moved by the animal's apparent recognition. Well, we had quite an adventure together. No microchip, no brand, Dr. Chen told me. We've put the word out, but so far, no one's claimed him. Keep me posted, I said, giving Rusty a final pat before heading out. I'd like to know he ends up somewhere good. I drove home, arriving by mid-afternoon. Martha listened to the full story over dinner, shaking her head in amazement. Only you, Frank, she said fondly. Only you would turn a routine delivery into a horse rescue mission. I slept soundly that night, satisfied that I'd done the right thing, believing my brief adventure with Rusty was over. I couldn't have been more wrong. 2 days later, around dawn, our dog Duke started barking frantically at the front door. Martha was still asleep, so I pulled on my robe and went to investigate, figuring it was probably a deer or coyote wandering too close to the house. When I opened the door, Duke shot past me, still barking, but not aggressively, more like he was announcing visitors. And there, standing in our front yard in the golden light of early morning, was Rusty, but he wasn't alone. 3 other horses stood with him, a dappled gray, a black with a white blaze, and a smaller palomino. All 4 animals stood quietly, watching me as if waiting for something. I rubbed my eyes, certain I was dreaming. Our house sits on 5 acres outside Amarillo, but it's a good 30 miles from the vet clinic. How had Rusty not only escaped, but found his way to my home? And who were these other horses? Martha, I called, not taking my eyes off the impossible scene before me. Martha, you need to see this. My wife appeared beside me, tying her robe. She froze when she saw the horses. Frank, she whispered. Is that ... Rusty, I confirmed. And apparently, he's brought friends. We stood there for several minutes, watching the horses as they calmly grazed on our front lawn. They made no attempt to run, even with Duke circling them curiously. Should we call Dr. Chen? Martha asked. Before I could answer, Rusty approached the porch, stopping just a few feet away. He nickered softly, then turned his body sideways, looking back at me expectantly. I think I said slowly, hardly believing the words coming out of my mouth, he wants me to get on. Frank, that's crazy, Martha said, but her voice lacked conviction. We were already well into crazy territory. Rusty took another step closer, then bobbed his head up and down. "I'm going to get dressed," I told Martha. "Call Dr. Chen. Tell her Rusty's here. Duh. And he's not alone." 10 minutes later, dressed in jeans and a flannel shirt, I approached Rusty cautiously. The horse remained perfectly still as I placed a hand on his back. No saddle, no bridle, nothing to hold on to except his mane. "I haven't ridden bareback since I was a teenager," I told him. Nevertheless, I grabbed a handful of mane and swung myself onto his back, surprised at how natural it felt. The moment I was seated, Rusty turned and began walking toward our property line, the other 3 horses following. In behind him, Martha stood on the porch, phone in hand. "Dr. Chen says Rusty broke out of his stall sometime during the night," she called. "She's on her way." I waved acknowledgement, but my attention was focused on where Rusty was taking me. We passed through our gate and turned west onto the county road that runs past our property. What happened next is the part of the story that makes people think I'm either lying or crazy. But I swear it's true. For nearly an hour, I rode Rusty, followed by the 3 other horses, across country roads and open fields. He seemed to know exactly where he was going, never hesitating at crossroads, moving with purpose. Eventually, we approached a rundown property I'd passed many times on my routes but never paid much attention to. A weathered sign reading Blackjack Ranch hung crookedly on a broken gate. Rusty stopped at the entrance, pawing the ground nervously. From where I sat, I could see several horse pens behind the main structure, a dilapidated house with peeling paint and broken windows. In those pens were at least a dozen horses, all looking severely undernourished, some with visible wounds. On their flanks, as I watched, a man emerged from the house, tall, gaunt, with a cigarette dangling from his mouth. He carried a whip in one hand and was heading toward the pens. Rusty trembled beneath me, and the other horses behind us whinnied softly, as if in distress. And suddenly, I understood. These weren't just random horses. They were escapees Rusty, and his companions had somehow gotten away from this place. This man, Rusty, had been fleeing when his colic struck him down on Route 66, and now, possibly, he had brought me back to help the others. I slid off Rusty's back and pulled out my phone. 911, I told the operator. "I need to report a case of animal abuse, and you're not going to believe how I found it." The 911 operator was professional but skeptical when I tried to explain how I discovered the abused horses. "Sir, just to be clear," she said, "you're calling because you rode a horse to this location?" "Yes," I replied, keeping my voice low as I moved behind a large oak tree out of sight of the ranch house. "The property's Blackjack Ranch on County Road 437, and you're certain the animals are being mistreated?" As if in answer, a sharp crack split the air, followed by a horse's pained whinny. I peered around the tree to see the gaunt man lashing one of the horses with his whip, cursing as the terrified animal tried to escape the blows. "I'm watching it happen right now," I told the operator, my blood boiling. "Please send someone quickly." "Deputies are on their way, sir." "Please do not approach the individual or enter the property." I agreed and ended the call, then immediately dialed Dr. Chen. She answered on the first ring. "Frank, where are you?" "I'm at your house with your wife." I explained the situation as concisely as possible. To her credit, Dr. Chen didn't question the bizarre circumstances. "I know that place," she said grimly. "We've had reports before, but the owner Silas Blackjack always cleans up just enough to avoid charges when inspectors come. I'll call animal control and meet you there with my trailer." I hung up and turned to find Rusty standing directly behind me, his intelligent eyes fixed on mine. The other 3 horses had moved closer to the ranch, staying just outside the fence line, nickering softly to the penned animals. "We're getting help, buddy," I assured Rusty, stroking his neck. "Just need to wait for the police," Rusty snorted, and pawed the ground impatiently. I know, I said. "But we can't just charge in there. The man has a whip, maybe worse." As if understanding my words, Rusty calmed, though he kept his gaze fixed on the ranch. Together, we watched as Silas Blackjack moved from pen to pen, roughly checking water troughs that appeared nearly empty. The horses inside cringed away from him, pressing themselves against the far sides of their enclosures. It was the longest 20 minutes of my life, waiting for help to arrive. I kept one hand on Rusty's neck, both to calm him and, strangely, to calm myself. There was something about this horse, a presence, an intelligence that defied explanation. Heard sirens in the distance. 2 sheriff's department vehicles appeared on the road, followed closely by Dr. Chen's truck and horse trailer. Blackjack heard them too. He dropped the bucket he was carrying and hurried toward the house. The deputies pulled up to the ranch entrance, and I stepped out from behind the tree, waving to get their attention. Dr. Chen parked behind them and rushed over to me, her eyes widening when she saw Rusty and the other horses. "How did he?" she began, then shook her head. "Never mind. We've got work to do." One of the deputies approached a stocky woman with a no-nonsense expression. Her nameplate read Rodriguez. "You, the 911 caller?" she asked me. I nodded. "Frank Dawson. I witnessed the ranch owner whipping one of the horses. And as you can see, their condition is terrible." Deputy Rodriguez surveyed the property with narrowed eyes. "We've had complaints about Blackjack before, but never enough evidence to make charges stick." She turned to Dr. Chen. "You're the vet." "Dr. Sarah Chen. I've documented previous concerns about this property, but, as you said, never enough for legal action." The second deputy was already at the front door of the ranch house, knocking forcefully. After a moment, Silas Blackjack appeared, his posture defensive. "What's all this about?" we heard him demand. "Animal welfare check, Mr. Blackjack," the deputy replied. "We've received reports of mistreatment. My animals are fine," Blackjack snapped. "This is private property. You need a warrant." Deputy Rodriguez joined her colleague, speaking in a tone that carried clearly to where we stood. "Sir, when we receive reports of ongoing abuse, we have authority to inspect. We can cooperate, or we can return with a warrant. And additional officers. Your choice." Blackjack glared but stepped aside grudgingly. The deputies entered the house while Dr. Chen and I waited by the vehicles. "Those horses," Dr. Chen said quietly, nodding toward Rusty and his companions. "They all came from here, didn't they?" "I think so," I replied. "Somehow Rusty knew I could help. He brought me here deliberately." Instead of dismissing this as nonsense, Dr. Chen studied the chestnut horse thoughtfully. "There's research about animal intelligence that would surprise most people. Horses in particular have complex social structures and problem-solving abilities we're only beginning to understand." Before I could respond, Deputy Rodriguez emerged from the house and waved us over. "Dr. Chen, we need your professional assessment of the animals." As we approached the pens, the full extent of the neglect became apparent. 12 horses in all, each showing signs of malnutrition. Ribs protruded beneath dull coats. Several had open sores where they'd been whipped. Water troughs contained only muddy dregs, and the hay in the feeders was moldy. Dr. Chen documented everything methodically, taking photographs, making notes, examining each horse while the deputies kept Blackjack under supervision. Her face grew increasingly grim. "This is criminal neglect," she told Deputy Rodriguez. "Several of these animals need immediate medical attention. I'll show signs of malnutrition and dehydration. It's based on their condition. I'd estimate this has been ongoing for months." "That's all I need to hear," Rodriguez replied. She turned to her partner. "Call for transport. We're seizing these animals." Blackjack, who had been watching sullenly from the porch, erupted. "You can't take my property. Those horses are worth money, not the way you've been treating them," Rodriguez countered. "Sir, you're under arrest for animal cruelty." As the deputy handcuffed a cursing Blackjack, Dr. Chen turned to me. "We'll need help transporting all these horses. I can take 4 in my trailer, but we'll need more vehicles. I know some people," I said, already pulling out my phone. "Fellow truckers with horse trailers, neighbors with livestock experience." Within an hour, a small convoy had assembled at Blackjack Ranch 3, additional trailers plus half a dozen volunteers from nearby farms. As we worked to carefully load the weakest horses first, I noticed something remarkable. Rusty and his 3 companions had approached the fence line. The penned horses, who had been skittish and difficult to handle, grew calmer in their presence. It was as if Rusty was communicating with them somehow, reassuring them. "I've never seen anything like it," murmured one of the volunteers. "A lifelong rancher named Bill. It's like they're talking to each other." By late afternoon, all the horses had been transported to various facilities, the most critical cases to Dr. Chen's clinic, others to temporary foster homes with experienced handlers. Blackjack was in custody, facing multiple felony charges of animal cruelty. As the last trailer pulled away, I found myself alone with Rusty and his 3 companions. Dr. Chen approached, wiping her hands on a towel. "What about these 4?" she asked. "They need proper evaluation too, especially since Rusty just had surgery." I looked at Rusty, who met my gaze steadily. There was something in those eyes at trust, a connection I couldn't explain. "I have 5 acres, I heard myself saying. It's not much, but there's good grass, clean water, room to run." Dr. Chen smiled. "I thought you might say that. I'll come by tomorrow to check them over properly." She hesitated, then added, In all my years of veterinary practice, I've never seen anything quite like this. Horses are intuitive, but this ... goes beyond intuition," I finished for her. "I know. I can't explain it either." As we prepared to leave, Deputy Rodriguez approached with a folder of paperwork. "We found some records in Blackjack's office," she told us. "Appears he was operating an illegal horse trading operation, buying animals cheap at auction and reselling them after minimal conditioning." Rodriguez nodded grimly. According to his notes, these 4 were part of a group he acquired 3 months ago. They escaped about 2 weeks ago. He's been looking for them, especially since they were his most valuable stock. That explains why Rusty was on Route 66, I said. They were running away. Smart animals, Rodriguez commented. And lucky they found you. She handed me some forms. These are temporary custody papers. Given the circumstances, the department is granting you emergency foster care of these for while the case proceeds. Likely they'll be permanently confiscated from Blackjack, given the evidence. I signed the papers, feeling a strange mix of emotions and gar at what these animals had endured. Amazement at how events had unfolded, and something else, something deeper, a sense that something profound had just entered my life. The ride home was surreal, me in my pickup truck, leading a procession of 4 horses who followed willingly, without restraint. Martha was waiting at our gate, her expression a mixture of disbelief and amusement. "Only you, Frank Dawson," she said, shaking her head as I explained the day's events. "Only you would go out to rescue 1 horse and come home with 4. Plus a criminal investigation." That night, after setting up temporary shelters and making sure our new guests were comfortable, Martha and I sat on our porch, watching the horses graze peacefully in the twilight. "What are we going to do with 4 horses?" Martha asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. "Keep them," I said simply. "At least Rusty. The others we'll see. Maybe find them good homes once the case is settled." Martha leaned her head against my shoulder. "You know, when I married a truck driver, I never imagined I'd end up running a horse sanctuary." I chuckled. Life takes some strange turns. As if hearing his name, Rusty looked up from grazing and gazed toward the porch. In the fading light, with his chestnut coat glowing like burnished copper, he seemed almost magical, a creature of legend rather than flesh and blood. He found you on the highway, Martha mused. Then found our home from 30 miles away. Then led you directly to where the other horses were being abused. Impossible, I agreed. And yet it happened. Maybe some things aren't meant to be explained, she suggested. Maybe they're just meant to be experienced. As darkness fell completely, I thought about the chain of events that had brought us here a routine morning. A sick horse on the roadside, a rescue that led to more rescues. How different things might have been if I'd driven past. If I'd called someone else to handle it. If I'd made any other choice along the way. I thought about all the miles I'd driven in my life, all the roads I'd traveled, and how none had led me to anything as extraordinary as what had unfolded over the past 3 days. Sometimes the most important journeys aren't measured in miles, but in moments of compassion. Sometimes the most valuable cargo isn't what you're paid to carry, but what fate entrusts to your care. And sometimes, just sometimes, the ones we rescue end up rescuing others, and in the process, rescue something in ourselves we didn't know needed saving. The weeks following the rescue at Blackjack Ranch were a whirlwind of activity. Our quiet 5 acres transformed into a hub of veterinary visits, police interviews, and curious neighbors stopping by to see the horses that had, according to local gossip, told a trucker about abuse. The story had spread through Amarillo, like wildfire, growing more fantastical with each retelling. By the time the local newspaper came calling, I was supposedly a horse whisperer with psychic abilities. I declined all interviews, preferring to let the focus remain on the animal abuse case rather than the unusual circumstances of its discovery. Silas Blackjack was facing multiple felony charges, with the district attorney using our case to push for maximum penalties. The evidence was overwhelming. Not just the condition of the horses we'd rescued, but records showing years of similar abuse and illegal trading. Dr. Chen became a regular visitor, monitoring the recovery of our 4 horses while coordinating care for the others seized from the ranch. Under her guidance, we converted our tool shed into a proper stable and fenced off portions of our property to create appropriate paddocks. "You're becoming quite the horseman," she remarked one afternoon, watching me confidently check Rusty's hooves for stones, a skill I'd mastered through hours of YouTube videos and patient instruction. "Necessity is a good teacher," I replied, though I still feel like I'm making it up as I go along. "That's called parenting," Dr. Chen said with a laugh. "And that's essentially what you're doing." She wasn't wrong. The 4 horses had distinct personalities that emerged more clearly as they recovered from their ordeal. The dappled gray, whom Martha had named Shadow, was cautious and reserved, always the last to approach for treats. The black with the white blaze, now called Midnight, was mischievous, fond of untying knots and opening gates if we didn't secure them properly. The Palomino, dubbed Sunny by our grandchildren during their first excited visit, was gentle and affectionate, following Martha around like a golden shadow whenever she worked in the garden. And then there was Rusty, my Rusty, from the beginning. Our connection had been different, deeper, more intuitive. He seemed to understand my words, responding not just to tone but to specific requests. He would appear at the kitchen window in the morning as I drank my coffee, nickering softly until I came out to greet him. When I returned from short hauls on the road, he would be waiting at the gate, regardless of the hour. "It's remarkable," Dr. Chen observed after witnessing one of these welcomes. "In my professional opinion, that horse believes you're his person. The feeling's mutual," I admitted. My trucking schedule had become more complicated with 4 horses to care for. Jerry, my dispatcher, had been surprisingly accommodating, arranging shorter routes that allowed me to be home more often. Martha had taken to the role of horse caretaker with unexpected enthusiasm, researching equine nutrition and behavior with the same intensity she'd once applied to her book club reading list. "I never thought I'd say this," she told me one evening, as we sat on the porch watching the horses graze in the sunset, "but I can't imagine our place without them now." 6 weeks after the rescue, we received a call from Deputy Rodriguez. The case against Blackjack was proceeding well, but she had news about our horses. "We've identified their original owners," she explained. "Before Blackjack acquired them, my heart sank. I'd known this might happen, but had pushed the possibility. Aside, not wanting to consider losing them, especially Rusty. All 4 horses were purchased legitimately at auction by Blackjack. Rodriguez continued. But their previous owners have been notified of the situation. 3 of them have relinquished any claim, given the circumstances. And the 4th? I asked, already knowing the answer. Rusty, or Phoenix, as he was originally named, belonged to a family in Oklahoma, the Wilsons. We're very interested in getting him back. I sat down heavily, phone clutched in my hand. I see. They're driving down this weekend to meet with you, Rodriguez added. I gave them your number. Hope that's okay. I thanked her automatically and hung up, and went outside to find Rusty. He was standing under the old oak tree as if waiting for me. When I approached, he lowered his head to my shoulder in what had become our customary greeting. Someone's coming to take you home, buddy, I told him, my voice thick. Your real home. Rusty snorted softly, his warm breath tickling my neck. I wrapped my arms around his strong neck, allowing myself a moment of selfish grief. In just 6 weeks, this horse had changed my life in ways I couldn't fully articulate. The thought of losing him felt like losing a piece of myself. Martha found me there a while later, still standing with Rusty under the oak. Jerry called, she said. Wanted to know if you could take a run to Oklahoma City tomorrow. Told him you'd call back. I nodded absently. Frank, what's wrong? I explained about the Wilsons, about Rusty's real name being Phoenix, about the impending visit that would likely take him away from us. Martha's expression softened. Oh, Frank, I'm so sorry. I know how special he is to you. It's for the best, I said, trying to convince myself. He should be with his original family. They probably missed him terribly, and you won't. Martha asked gently. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The Wilsons arrived on Saturday morning, middle-aged couple with 2 teenage daughters. They pulled up in a pickup truck with a horse trailer attached, their intentions clear. Mr. Dawson, man said, extending his hand. I'm Robert Wilson. This is my wife Elaine, and our daughters Abby and Grace. I shook his hand, noting his firm grip and honest eyes. Please call me Frank. This is my wife, Martha. We can't. Thank you enough for what you did, Elaine, Wilson said warmly. When we heard about Phoenix, about the rescue and everything that followed, well, it seemed like a miracle. The police said you saved lots of horses, one of the girls, Abby. I thought it excitedly. That Phoenix led you to them. Something like that, I acknowledged, not wanting to get into the inexplicable details. Would you like to see him? You walked to the paddock, where all 4 horses were grazing. The moment we approached the fence, Rusty Phoenix looked up. He stared at the Wilson family for a long moment, then trotted over to where I stood. He remembers you, Robert Wilson observed. That's good. Phoenix, the younger daughter, called, climbing onto the lowest fence rail. It's me? It's Grace. The horse turned his head toward her voice, ears pricked forward. He nickered softly, then looked back at me as if uncertain. Go say hello. Rusty hesitated, then walked slowly toward the Wilson family. The girls were openly crying now, reaching out to touch his neck, his muzzle. He allowed their affection, but his body language remained reserved, his eyes frequently returning to where I stood. He was my show horse, Grace explained through tears. We won 3 junior championships together, and he got spooked during a thunderstorm and broke through our fence. We searched for weeks. How did he end up at auction? Martha asked. Robert Wilson shook his head. Someone must have found him and decided to make a quick buck instead of looking for his owners. It happens more than you'd think. We invited the Wilsons inside for coffee, leaving Rusty Phoenix in the paddock. As we sat around our kitchen table, they shared stories about their life with him, showing us pictures of Grace riding him in competitions, ribbons proudly displayed. He's a registered quarter horse, Elaine explained, worth quite a bit, especially with his show record. But more than that, he's part of our family. We understand, Martha said, squeezing my hand under the table. After coffee, we returned. Outside, the Wilsons had brought Phoenix's old halter and lead rope, embroidered with his show name, Wilson's Rising Phoenix. Would you like to put it on him? Robert asked me. He seems to trust you. I took the halter, its leather soft and well cared for, and approached Rusty in the paddock. He came to me immediately, pressing his forehead against my chest in a gesture that had become familiar. I took the halter, its leather soft and well cared for, and approached Rusty in the paddock. He came to me immediately, pressing his forehead against my chest in a gesture that had become familiar. "Time to go home, buddy," I said softly, my voice breaking slightly as I slipped the halter over his head. It fit perfectly, of course, a physical reminder that he had a life, an identity, before he came into mine. I led him toward the Wilsons, who were waiting by their trailer. Grace was openly crying now, her sister's arm around her shoulders. As we approached, Rusty suddenly stopped, planting his hooves firmly in the dirt. "These are your people, your real people," Rusty snorted, tossing his head. He backed up several steps, pulling the rope from my surprised grip. Then, to everyone's astonishment, he trotted back to where the other 3 horses stood, watching by the fence. He positioned himself beside them, all 4 horses now facing us in an almost deliberate formation. "I've never seen him do that," Robert Wilson said, confusion evident in his voice. "He's always been so well-mannered." I approached Rusty again, speaking softly. "Come on now, don't make this harder." But when I reached for the lead rope, Rusty sidestepped, keeping just out of reach. He wasn't being aggressive or fearful, just resolute. Grace Wilson came up beside me, wiping tears from her cheeks. "Phoenix," she called, "don't you remember me?" Rusty looked at her, then at me, then back at the other 3 horses. He nickered softly, and to my surprise, all 4 horses moved forward as one, approaching the fence line together. "Wait. What are they doing?" Abby Wilson whispered. No one answered. We all watched as the 4 horses lined up at the fence, facing the Wilson family. Rusty positioned himself directly in front of Grace, lowering his head to her level. The girl reached out tentatively, stroking his forehead. "I missed you so much," she told him. For a long moment, horse and girl regarded each other, a reunion, both tender and somehow solemn. Then Rusty raised his head and turned to look at me, his gaze unwavering. Dr. Chen, who had arrived to check on Shadow's healing leg wound, had been observing quietly from a distance. Now she approached, a thoughtful expression on her face. "You know," she said to the Wilsons, "I've been working with these horses since their rescue. What I'm seeing right now is remarkable. They've formed a herd bond, a family unit. And in that family, Rusty Phoenix has become the leader." "What are you saying?" Robert Wilson asked. Dr. Chen gestured toward the 4 horses still standing together at the fence. In the wild, horses form intense social bonds. These 4 have been through trauma together, escaped together, and now recovered together. Separating them would be ... difficult. For all of them. I hadn't considered this aspect, that Rusty's reluctance might be about more than just his connection to me, that he might feel responsible for the others. Grace Wilson was quiet for a moment, her hand still resting on Rusty's neck. Then she looked up at her parents, tears streaming down her face. "He's happy here," she said simply. "Can't you see?" Robert and Elaine exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. "Came to bring our horse home," Robert said slowly. Maybe ... Maybe he is home," Elaine finished for him. The words hung in the air, hope and heartbreak mingled together. I hardly dared breathe. Grace stepped back from the fence, wiping her eyes. "Dad, Mom, I think Phoenix has a new job now. He's taking care of these other horses, and ... single quotes," she glanced at me. "He's taking care of Mr. Dawson too, honey," Elaine began. "I know this is hard." "But no, Mom. Look at them," Grace insisted. "Remember how Phoenix always tried to protect the younger horses at our place? How he'd stand guard when there was a storm? That's what he's doing here. He found a new herd that needed him." I was stunned by the teenager's insight, canned by her generosity in the face of her own disappointment. Robert Wilson cleared his throat. "Frank, could Martha and I have a word in private?" The 3 of us walked a short distance away, leaving the girls with Dr. Chen and the horses. "This is a complicated situation," Robert began. "Legally, Phoenix is our property. We have his registration papers, his competition records." "I understand," I said, preparing myself for the inevitable. But, Robert continued, there's more to consider here than just ownership papers. Martha spoke up. We want you to know that whatever you decide, we understand. These past weeks with the horses have been a gift, regardless of the outcome. Robert looked back at his daughters, now talking animatedly with Dr. Chen as all 4 horses remained attentively at the fence. Our family has a small ranch outside Oklahoma City, he said. 20 acres, several other horses. Phoenix was Grace's special project, her first show horse. Losing him was devastating for her. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. But seeing him now, Robert continued, with these other horses, with you, it's clear something extraordinary has happened here. Elaine joined us, having overheard the conversation. What my husband is trying to say is that we need to consider what's best for Phoenix, not just what we want. What are you suggesting? I asked cautiously. Robert and Elaine exchanged another look. We're not entirely sure yet, Robert admitted. But we'd like to propose a compromise of sorts over the next hour. The 4 adults sat on my porch and worked out an arrangement that none of us could have anticipated that morning. The Wilsons would legally transfer ownership of Phoenix, now officially dual-named Phoenix Rusty, on his registration papers, to me. With several conditions, Dorse would be welcome to visit whenever she wanted. If she entered any local shows, she could ride him as her mount. Most significantly, the Wilsons offered to take 2 of our other horses, Shadow and Midnight, to their ranch, where they would have more space and professional care. We came for 1 horse and are leaving with 2, Robert said with a wry smile. Not exactly what we planned. Are you sure about this? I asked Grace later, as she helped me groom Rusty one last time before they departed. The teenager nodded, running a brush along Rusty's gleaming flank. I've been thinking about veterinary school, she said. Dr. Chen says I have a natural way with animals. Maybe this is all happening for a reason. Maybe so, I agreed, watching as she worked with confident, gentle hands. Besides, Grace added with a small smile, this way, I still get to see him. And he gets to stay where he's needed. When the Wilson family finally departed that evening with Shadow and Midnight safely loaded in their trailer. There were tears all around, but they were complex tears, containing both sadness and a deeper satisfaction. We had all somehow found a solution that honored the remarkable bond between these animals while creating new connections between our families. As their truck pulled away, I stood with Rusty and Sunny in the paddock, watching until the trailer disappeared from view. Well, buddy, I said too. Rusty, looks like you're staying. He nudged my shoulder gently. Martha joined us, slipping her arm through mine. You know what amazes me most about all this, she said. What's that? How one simple act of kindness, stopping to help an injured animal on the side of the road, could lead to so much. Horses rescued, a criminal caught, 2 families connected. I thought about the chain of improbable events that had brought us to this moment. Finding Rusty on Route 66. His mysterious appearance at our home with the other horses, the journey to Blackjack Ranch, and now this unexpected resolution with the Wilson family. Nothing simple about it, I replied, watching as Rusty guided Sunny toward the water trough, still playing the role of protector. But maybe that's the point. Maybe the most important journeys never are. 6 months passed, bringing changes to our lives that I could never have imagined before that fateful morning on Route 66. The most immediate change was to our property. 5 acres had been sufficient for a retired couple with occasional visits from grandchildren, but it proved inadequate for properly housing 2 horses with room to run. The solution came from an unexpected quarter. Our neighbor, Harold Jenkins, was an elderly widower who had been quietly observing our horse adventure with interest. One evening, he appeared at our door with a proposition. Frank, Martha, he said, settling into our living room with a cup of coffee, I've been thinking. My 15 acres is mostly sitting empty these days. Haven't had livestock since Margaret passed. He paused, running a weathered hand over his knee. Been watching you 2 with those horses. Doing a fine job. But they need more space. We've been looking at options, I admitted. I'm proposing we take down the fence between our properties. Join the land. You can use my old barn, my pastures. In exchange, you help me maintain the place. Getting too old to keep up with it all myself, Martha and I were stunned by the generosity of the offer. That's too much, Harold, I protested. We couldn't possibly. It's not charity, he interrupted gruffly. Practical. Place needs life. Horses. People. Been too quiet since Margaret died. His voice softened. Besides, those animals you rescued, they deserve the space. And I'd like to be part of the story if you'll have me. And so, our modest 5 acres expanded to 20, with Harold becoming an enthusiastic participant in what he called the horse experiment. His old barn was renovated with help from local volunteers who had followed the story of the Blackjack Ranch rescue. The Wilson family made regular visits, with Grace spending most of her summer break with us, going with Rusty and Sonny while learning from Dr. Chen. The case against Silas Blackjack proceeded through the legal system, culminating in a trial. That drew attention from animal rights advocates across the state. I was called to testify about the discovery of the abused horses story I told, as straightforwardly as possible, on playing the more inexplicable aspects of Rusty's role. Nevertheless, the local media latched onto the angle of the hero, horse who had led his rescuer back to save others. The story spread, first regionally, then nationally. A producer from a popular nature documentary series contacted us about featuring Rusty's story in an episode about animal intelligence and empathy. I was reluctant at first, uncomfortable with the attention, and skeptical about how they would portray events. I still couldn't fully explain. But Dr. Chen convinced me that the educational value outweighed my concerns. People need to understand that animals are more complex, more aware than we give them credit for, she argued. Rusty's story might change how people think about animal consciousness. The filming took place over several days. They even brought in an animal behaviorist from a university to observe Rusty's interactions and offer scientific context. What we're seeing here, the behaviorist explained during her interview, challenges our conventional understanding of equine cognition. The sequence of events escaping abuse, seeking human help when injured. When asked for my perspective, I kept it simple. I don't claim to understand exactly what happened or how. I just know that when I found an injured horse on Route 66, I did what anyone with a heart would do. Everything that followed. Well, sometimes life takes unexpected turns. The documentary aired 3 months later, bringing another wave of attention to our quiet corner of Texas. Letters and emails poured in from around the country, people sharing their own stories of animal intelligence, offering support, or simply expressing gratitude for a story that had moved them. One letter in particular stood out. It came from a rehabilitation center in Fort Worth, where therapists had shown the documentary to their patients, many of them veterans struggling with PTSD and other trauma-related conditions. Your story about Rusty resonated deeply with our patients, the director wrote. The idea that healing from trauma can lead to helping others heal from similar experiences. It's powerful. Several of our veterans have expressed interest in equine therapy after watching your story. This unexpected connection led to a new chapter in our journey. With guidance from Dr. Chen and support from the Wilson family, we began hosting small groups from the rehabilitation center. Veterans would spend a day at our expanded property, working with Rusty and Sonny under the supervision of trained therapists. The impact was immediate and profound. Something about Rusty's presence, his plaintiveness, his attentiveness, his own history of overcoming trauma seemed to reach people in ways that traditional therapy sometimes couldn't. He knows, one veteran told me after a particularly emotional session, somehow, that horse knows what it's like to carry scars that don't show on the outside. I couldn't argue with that assessment. I'd witnessed Rusty's sensitivity firsthand, how he approached different people with varying degrees of gentleness or encouragement, almost as if he could read their needs. The therapy program grew organically, eventually becoming a formal partnership with the rehabilitation center. Harold, who had served in Vietnam decades earlier, found new purpose in working with fellow veterans, sharing his own experiences while helping them connect with the horses. The Wilsons remained deeply involved, with Robert offering his expertise. In horse training in Grace now in her first year of pre-veterinary studies developing specialized activities for the therapy sessions. Shadow and Midnight, thriving at the Wilson Ranch, occasionally joined us for these events. Transported in their newly purchased trailer emblazoned with the logo of what we now called Phoenix Rising Equine Therapy. 1 year to the day after I found Rusty on Route 66, we hosted a special event at the Property Part Celebration, part fundraiser for the therapy program. Local businesses donated food and supplies, musicians volunteered their talents, and nearly 200 people gathered to hear the story and meet the horses who had inspired it all. As twilight fell, I found myself standing with Rusty at the edge of the gathering, both of us, watching the joyful scene unfold. Dr. Chen approached, a glass of lemonade in hand. "Quite a journey you two have had," she observed, patting Rusty's neck affectionately. "Never would have predicted any of this," I agreed. "Sometimes I still can't believe it happened, you know?" Dr. Chen said thoughtfully. "In veterinary school, we're taught to maintain scientific objectivity to avoid anthropomorphizing animals or attributing human motivations to their behaviors." She watched as Rusty gently nuzzled a young girl in a wheelchair, one of several children from a local special needs program who had joined our therapy sessions. "But then, you encounter a case like Rusty," she continued, "and you're forced to reconsider those boundaries, to acknowledge that there might be depths to animal consciousness that we're only beginning to understand." I nodded, thinking of all the moments over the past year when Rusty had demonstrated an awareness that seemed to transcend conventional explanations, his ability to find our home from miles away, his apparent understanding of human emotions, his protective nature toward both horses and people in need. "Whatever the explanation," I said, "I'm just grateful our paths crossed that morning." "Crossed?" Dr. Chen smiled. "Frank, I'd say they merged completely," as if to confirm her assessment. Rusty pressed his forehead against my shoulder, the gesture that had become his signature way of connecting with me. In that moment, I felt the truth of Dr. Chen's words. Our journeys had indeed merged, creating something neither of us could have navigated alone. The celebration continued into the evening with speeches and testimonials from people whose lives had been touched by our unexpected adventure, veterans finding healing, children discovering confidence, neighbors building community around a shared purpose. Martha joined me as the event wound down, slipping her hand into mine. "Remember when you called me that morning?" she asked. "When you said you'd found a horse on Route 66. I remember thinking you'd think I'd lost my mind," I replied with a chuckle. "I did, a little," she admitted. "But I also remember thinking if anyone would stop to help an injured animal on the highway, it would be Frank." She looked around at the transformed property, the renovated barn now painted a cheerful red, the expanded paddocks where horses grazed peacefully, the gathering area where people from all walks of life had come together in celebration. "You stopped to help one horse," she said softly, "and look what happened." As if on cue, Rusty raised his head and nickered softly, sound I'd come to recognize as his way of expressing contentment. In the fading light, with his chestnut coat glowing like burnished copper, he looked almost magical, a creature of legend rather than flesh and blood. But he was real, as real as the people whose lives he'd touched, as real as the journey we'd traveled together, as real as the unexpected community that had formed around his remarkable story. Sometimes the most important journeys begin with the simplest choices, stopping to help when it would be easier to drive on, extending kindness without expectation of return, recognizing the dignity in another living being suffering. Sometimes those simple choices lead to destinations we never could have imagined. 5 years have passed since that morning on Route 66 when I found an injured horse that would change my life. Much has changed, yet the heart of the story remains the same, a reminder that compassion, once set in motion, creates ripples that extend far beyond our vision. Phoenix Rising Equine Therapy is now a registered nonprofit organization, serving hundreds of people annually: veterans, children with special needs, survivors of trauma, and others seeking healing through connection with horses. What began as an improvised program on our expanded property has grown to include partnerships with 3 rehabilitation centers across Texas and Oklahoma. The Wilson family remains deeply involved. Robert serves on our board of directors, bringing his expertise in equine management to our operations. Elaine coordinates our volunteer program, which now includes over 50 regular participants. And Grace has become the heart of our therapeutic approach. After completing her undergraduate studies in record time, Grace was accepted to veterinary school, where she's specializing in equine medicine with a focus on rehabilitation. She splits her time between her studies and our program, developing innovative approaches that combine veterinary science with therapeutic practices. Her bond with Rusty has only deepened over the years, evolving into a professional partnership that continues to amaze everyone who witnesses them work together. Shadow and Midnight, the 2 horses who went to live with the Wilsons, have become champions in their own right. Shadow in dressage competitions, and Midnight in therapeutic riding demonstrations. They return to our property regularly, especially for our special events, creating joyful reunions with Rusty and Sunny that never fail to move observers. Harold Jenkins, our neighbor whose generosity expanded our property, passed away peacefully last year at the age of 87. In his will, he left his entire property to Phoenix Rising, the stipulation that it always remain a place of healing for both animals and people. We honored his memory by naming our main barn Jenkins Hall and establishing a scholarship fund for veterans interested in learning equine therapy techniques. Dr. Chen has become a nationally recognized advocate for animal welfare and cognition. Research using Rusty's story as a compelling case study in her presentations at veterinary conferences. The documentary featuring our story has been expanded into a series exploring animal intelligence, with the episode about Rusty winning several awards and being used in university courses on animal behavior. As for Silas Blackjack, justice was served. He received a 10-year sentence for animal cruelty and illegal trafficking, with no possibility of parole for at least 7 years. More importantly, his case led to stricter animal welfare laws in Texas, with increased penalties for abuse and more resources allocated to enforcement. The legislation, informally known as Rusty's Law, stands as a testament to how one animal's story can create systemic change. Martha and I still live in the same house, though our lives bear little resemblance to the quiet retirement we once envisioned. Our home has become the administrative hub for Phoenix Rising, with a small office addition where Martha coordinates programs and I handle the logistics of transportation and facilities. I still drive trucks, occasionally short hauls that allow me to be home regularly, but my primary occupation now is managing our growing operation. Who would have thought that at 60, I'd be running an equine therapy center with a staff of part-time professionals and dozens of volunteers, and Rusty. At 15 years old, he remains the heart and soul of everything we do. Though he's slowed down a bit, his intelligence and empathy seem only to have deepened with age. He has an uncanny ability to identify which therapy participants need his attention most, often approaching those struggling with the deepest trauma before the therapists have even assessed their needs. Researchers from several universities have studied him, publishing papers on his exceptional cognitive abilities and social intelligence. One neuroscientist described him as operating at the outer limits of what we understand about equine cognition, while an animal behaviorist suggested that Rusty represents a level of interspecies empathy that challenges our conventional understanding of animal consciousness. For me, though, scientific explanations matter less than the daily reality of working alongside this remarkable animal. Every morning, Rusty still meets me at the paddock fence, still presses his forehead against my shoulder in greeting, still communicates in ways that transcend conventional understanding. On the anniversary of our first encounter each year, Rusty and I take a private ride along a quiet stretch of countryside. There's no therapy participants, no volunteers, no cameras or researchers, just the 2 of us. Commemorating the moment our paths converged, during these rides, I often find myself reflecting on the extraordinary chain of events that a single act of compassion set in motion. If I hadn't stopped that morning on Route 66, if I hadn't taken Rusty to Dr. Chen, if he hadn't somehow found his way to our home 2 days later, the what-ifs are endless. each one a reminder of how precarious the thread of fate can be, how easily our most meaningful connections might never have formed. This morning was our 5th anniversary ride. As we crested a hill overlooking the expanded Phoenix Rising property, the red barn gleaming in the distance, paddocks dotted with grazing horses, therapy sessions underway in the training ring's eye, patted Rusty's neck and felt the familiar surge of gratitude. "Look what we built, buddy," I told him. Rusty nickered softly, as if in agreement. His ears pricked forward as he surveyed the scene below. On our return, we were greeted by an unexpected visitor, Deputy Rodriguez, now Captain Rodriguez of the County Sheriff's Department. She's remained a steadfast supporter of our program, often referring veterans from her department for therapy sessions. "Thought I'd stop by for the anniversary," she said, offering Rusty an apple from her pocket. "5 years since you made that 911 call." "Best call I ever made," I replied. Rodriguez smiled, watching as Rusty delicately took the apple from her palm. "You know, in law enforcement, we see a lot of darkness, the worst of what humans do, to each other and to animals. But then there are stories like this one." She gestured toward the therapy session visible in the distance, where a young veteran was cautiously approaching Sunny under Grace's gentle guidance. "Reminds me why we do the work," she finished. As Captain Rodriguez departed, I led Rusty back to his paddock, where Sunny greeted him with a gentle nuzzle. The two horses have remained inseparable over the years, their bond a daily reminder of their shared journey from abuse to healing. Martha was waiting for me on the porch, a knowing smile on her face. After 32 years of marriage, she can read my anniversary ride emotions like an open book. "Good ride?" "Me, a glass of iced tea. It's the best," I confirmed, settling into the chair beside her. We sat in comfortable silence, watching the activity across our property, volunteers tending to horses, therapists working with participants, visitors touring the facilities. The quiet retirement we once envisioned had been replaced by something far more demanding, but infinitely more rewarding. "You know what I was thinking about on the ride today?" I said finally. "What's that?" "What sometimes the most important cargo isn't what you're paid to carry?" Martha smiled, reaching for my hand. "And sometimes the most valuable journeys aren't measured in miles." Exactly. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the property, I thought about all the lives that had intersected because of one injured horse on Route 66, the Wilsons finding new purpose, Harold Jenkins sharing his land, Dr. Chen advancing her research, veterans finding healing, children discovering confidence, and Martha and I embarking on the most unexpected chapter of our lives. I thought about how a single act of compassion can set in motion a sequence of events that transforms not just one life, but many, creating connections, building community, healing wounds both visible and hidden. And I thought about Rusty, who had somehow known to seek help not just for himself but for others who had, in his mysterious horse wisdom, recognized something in a passing truck driver that morning that made him believe I would stop, I would care, I would follow where he led. Sometimes the most extraordinary journeys begin with the simplest choices. Sometimes the ones we rescue end up rescuing others, and the process rescue something in ourselves we didn't know needed saving. And sometimes, just sometimes, an injured horse on the shoulder of Route 66 can lead you to exactly where you need tobe.